Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready to dive deep into the world of schizophrenia? Today we'll be unpacking a fascinating lecture by Dr. Joshua Rothman. He's a psychiatrist and neuroscientist at Harvard, and he really has this incredible ability to explain complex brain science
Yeah.
in a way that even I can understand.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
So what's really interesting about this lecture is that it goes beyond just, the facts and figures of schizophrenia.
Right.
We're going to be exploring the actual experiences,
Exactly.
people living with it.
The lived experience.
Yeah, and the cutting edge research, that's paving the way for better treatments.
It's a really great lecture.
It's based on a YouTube video from the Harvard Brain Science Initiative channel
Okay.
called Schizophrenia 101.
Schizophrenia 101.
But trust me, this deep dive is anything but basic.
Oh, I agree.
We're going to be tackling some pretty big questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, is schizophrenia a neurodevelopmental disorder?
Meaning something that originates, in childhood?
Yeah.
Or is it neurodegenerative like Alzheimer's disease?
Right.
What role do genes and our environment play?
Yeah.
And why are the negative symptoms of schizophrenia so debilitating
Right.
and so difficult to treat?
It's true. Those are really important questions to be asking.
We'll even dive into the dopamine puzzle
Okay.
and try to understand why smoking rates are so high
Interesting.
among people with schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, there is.
Let's get started.
Okay.
First things first, what exactly is schizophrenia?
Oh,
I feel like it's one of those
Bell?
conditions that's often misunderstood.
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of misconceptions out there about schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And it's important to move beyond, those simplistic definitions that we often hear.
Right.
And really understand, like we were saying, the lived experience of the illness. We often just focus on like the most dramatic symptoms,
Yeah.
like hallucinations,
Right.
delusions.
Right.
But there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual, uses this Chinese menu approach
Yeah.
to diagnosis, where you need a certain number of symptoms from a list that includes delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, catatonic behavior, and negative symptoms.
Right.
It makes it sound very clinical, doesn't it?
It does. It makes it sound very, very sort of cut and dry. And that's one of the challenges, I think, of using a manual like that to try to describe a condition
Right.
that's as complex and as diverse as schizophrenia. It doesn't manifest in the same way for everyone.
Of course.
The range of symptoms and experiences is incredibly broad.
Yeah.
Which is why, we talk about this schizophrenia spectrum.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And sometimes just hearing about those experiences can be so powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
More powerful than reading any definition in a textbook.
Yeah.
And there's this brief but impactful clip from the video
Okay.
that really gives you a sense
Wow.
what it's like to experience auditory hallucinations.
I see.
So
Okay.
let's take a listen.
Okay.
Audio clip. A voice saying, "You are so stupid."
Wow.
Wow. Just hearing that for a few seconds
Yeah.
sent chills down my spine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it would be like to live with those voices constantly.
It's incredibly distressing. And, as Dr. Rothman pointed out in the lecture, those auditory hallucinations are often negative and critical,
Yeah.
which, really adds to the emotional burden of the illness.
It's not just about hearing voices either.
Right.
It's the impact that those voices have on your thoughts, on your sense of self, on your ability to function in the world.
It affects everything. Yeah. And we can't forget about the negative symptoms,
Right.
which are often overlooked, but can be incredibly debilitating.
Absolutely.
And in the video, Dr. Rothman shared the case study of Bob,
Right.
who struggled with apathy, lack of motivation, social withdrawal.
Right.
And his story was heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is.
He couldn't maintain a routine.
Right.
He became financially dependent, and he didn't even realize how much his illness was affecting him or the people around him.
Yeah, it really is. It highlights the tragic nature of this illness.
Yeah.
It affects not only the individual, but also their families
Of course.
and loved ones.
Yeah.
It's a ripple effect of suffering.
It really challenges us to think about how we define illness and disability and how we can better support those who are struggling.
You're right.
Now, let's get into one of the big debates in schizophrenia research.
Okay.
Is it neurodevelopmental?
Or neurodegenerative?
This is the big question.
This is a crucial question
Yeah.
because the answer has major implications
Oh.
for how we approach treatment
Right.
and prevention.
Yeah, for sure.
If schizophrenia is neurodevelopmental,
Okay.
it means that something goes awry in the brain's wiring
Mm-hmm.
during childhood or adolescence.
Right.
But if it's neurodegenerative,
Okay.
it means there's a progressive loss of brain cells,
Yeah.
similar to what we see in Alzheimer's disease.
Exactly.
So historically, schizophrenia was seen as a type of dementia precox,
Mm-hmm.
meaning premature dementia.
Right.
And this was largely based on observations of cognitive impairment in patients.
Yeah.
And early pioneers in the field like Kraepelin and Bleuler
Oh, yeah.
really shaped our understanding of the illness.
They did. They were really influential in the early days.
And for a long time, the neurodegenerative model held sway.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at the evidence more closely,
Right.
some things don't quite add up.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
what-
Yeah. Tell me more.
Well, for instance,
Yeah.
enlarged ventricles,
Okay.
a common finding in neurodegenerative disorders,
Mm-hmm.
are present in people with schizophrenia.
Right.
But unlike in Alzheimer's,
Okay.
there isn't the ongoing cognitive decline you'd expect
Yeah.
in a neurodegenerative condition.
I see.
It's more of a plateau.
Interesting. So it's like it levels off
Yeah.
at some point
Yeah.
instead of continuing to decline.
Exactly.
That is interesting. Right. So it's not quite fitting that pattern.
So that's one strike against the neurodegenerative model.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that points to a neurodevelopmental origin?
There is.
Says schizophrenia.
There is, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Brain imaging studies have shown
Cool.
something really quite striking.
Mm-hmm.
Accelerated cortical thinning in adolescence.
Cortical thinning.
Yes.
What does that mean exactly?
So it refers to the thinning of the outer layer of the brain,
Okay.
the cortex.
Which is responsible for higher level cognitive functions.
Yeah.
Like thinking and planning and decision making,
Right.
all those good things.
So is this thinning a bad thing?
Well, some cortical thinning is actually a normal part of brain development.
Right.
It's a process called synaptic pruning,
Mm-hmm.
where the brain kind of gets rid of unnecessary connections
Okay.
to become more efficient.
So it's like decluttering your brain,
Exactly.
making it more streamlined.
Yes, exactly like that.
But in schizophrenia,
Yeah.
this pruning process seems to be accelerated.
It does, yeah.
And it starts earlier,
Yeah.
particularly in those areas of the brain involved in, higher level thinking and decision making.
Exactly.
So it's not just the presence of the thinning,
Right.
but the timing and the location
Exactly. Yeah.
that are important.
Precisely.
And here's another intriguing finding.
Okay, what's that?
This pattern of accelerated cortical thinning
Right.
is also seen in individuals who are at high risk for developing psychosis. Really?
Even before they show any symptoms.
So even before they've been diagnosed?
Yeah.
Wow, so that's fascinating.
Yeah, so it could be an early warning sign,
Oh, I see.
a way to identify those who might benefit from early intervention strategies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So we're starting to see a stronger case here
Yeah.
for the neurodevelopmental model.
Yeah.
But what about genetics?
Right.
What role do genes play in all of this?
Well, genes definitely play a significant role.
Okay.
Schizophrenia is highly heritable,
Okay.
with estimates suggesting that around 80% of the risk
Wow.
can be attributed to genetic factors.
That's a lot higher than I would have guessed.
It is, yeah,
Ah.
80%. But thanks to large-scale genome-wide association studies,
Okay.
we've been able to pinpoint hundreds of genes
100.
that are associated with an increased risk of developing schizophrenia.
So we're talking about a lot of genes here.
We are, yeah.
Not just one or two.
It's not like a single gene. That determines whether or not you'll develop schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more complex than that.
So it's not as simple as saying,
Yeah.
if you have this gene, you'll get schizophrenia.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a much more complex interplay of multiple genes
Right.
and other factors.
And other factors, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's even more intriguing is that
Yeah.
many of these genes that are linked to schizophrenia
Mm-hmm.
are also implicated in other mental health conditions,
It's true, yeah.
like bipolar disorder,
Bipolar disorder,
Right.
depression, autism.
autism, yeah, a whole range of conditions.
So it suggests that there might be some shared genetic roots
Right.
for mental illness in general.
That's a very active area of research.
Yeah.
Scientists are really trying to understand
Yeah.
how these different genes interact with each other and with
Right.
the environment
Right.
to influence brain development and function.
It makes you wonder if there might be common pathways or
Yeah.
mechanisms at play? Absolutely. That's a really important question.
Speaking of the environment,
Yes,
we can't forget about the role it plays.
of course not.
What kind of environmental factors
Like
have
what
been
your
linked to
said.
schizophrenia?
There are a number of environmental factors that
Okay.
have been associated with an increased risk,
Okay.
including things like urban living.
Wait, even just living in a city
It's complex,
can increase your risk.
but studies have shown a correlation between urban living
Okay.
and an increased risk of schizophrenia.
Interesting.
There are a few possible explanations for this.
Okay.
Cities tend to have higher levels of pollution,
Right.
which could impact brain development.
Makes sense.
And they also tend to have more social stressors,
Mm-hmm.
like crowding and
Right.
noise and crime.
Yeah, it's like a constant bombardment of sensory input and
Yeah.
stress.
It can be overwhelming.
What about migration?
Right.
How does that play a role?
Well, migration itself can be a very stressful experience,
Okay.
especially for those fleeing conflict or poverty.
Yeah.
And the stress of adapting to a new culture and language can also take a toll on mental health.
It's a lot of change and uncertainty.
It is.
Yeah. And then there's childhood trauma.
Right.
That's just heartbreaking to think about.
It is. It's a very sensitive topic.
Who can something that happens so early in life have such a lasting impact?
Well, the developing brain is incredibly sensitive to stress and trauma.
Okay.
Early adversity can disrupt the delicate balance of neurochemicals and brain circuits,
Right.
increasing the vulnerability to mental illness later in life.
So early intervention and support services
Absolutely.
can make a world of difference.
They can, yeah. Early intervention is key.
Now, there's another environmental factor
Okay.
that we need to discuss, and that's cannabis use.
Right. The cannabis and schizophrenia link.
I've heard a lot about this,
It's a hot topic.
but it always seems to be a bit of a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to tease apart.
Do people with a predisposition to schizophrenia use cannabis more often?
Right.
Or does cannabis use trigger the illness
Right.
in vulnerable individuals?
It's a complex issue,
Yeah.
and the research is still ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
But there is evidence to suggest that both scenarios can be true.
Oh, interesting.
People with a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia might be more likely to use cannabis,
Okay.
perhaps as a way of self-medicating certain symptoms.
So they're not just seeking a high,
Right.
but they might be trying to alleviate some of the discomfort they're feeling.
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
At the same time, though,
Okay.
there's also evidence that cannabis use,
Mm-hmm.
especially during adolescence when the brain is still developing,
Right. That's a critical period.
can increase the risk of psychosis
Oh,
in
wow.
those who are genetically vulnerable.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
It is, yeah.
It could be both a consequence and a contributor to the illness.
Exactly. And it really highlights the importance of understanding that complex interplay between genes and environment.
And how they influence
Yeah.
brain development and risk for mental illness.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
It seems like we're constantly uncovering
It seems that way, doesn't it?
new layers of complexity.
Yeah, the brain is a very complex organ.
Earlier, you mentioned that there were some things about the neurodegenerative model
Yeah.
that didn't quite add up.
Yes.
Are there any other surprising findings
There are a few.
that have emerged from the research?
One that I found particularly interesting
Okay.
was the link between maternal infections during pregnancy
Okay.
and an increased risk of schizophrenia in the offspring.
Really? Even common infections like the flu or a cold?
Even relatively mild infections can have an impact.
Hmm.
And it doesn't even have to be a respiratory infection.
Oh, wow.
Urinary tract infections during pregnancy
Wow.
have also been linked to a higher risk of schizophrenia.
That's wild.
It is.
So
Yeah.
what's the thinking here? How could something like a maternal infection affect the developing brain?
The current thinking is that the mother's immune response to the infection, even if it's mild,
Yeah.
could trigger a cascade of events
Okay.
that disrupts fetal brain development.
So it's not the infection itself
Right.
that's crossing the placenta and harming the fetus,
It's not like a direct attack.
but rather
It's more of an indirect effect.
the mother's immune response that's having this effect.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction.
And it's led some researchers to wonder
Right.
about the potential long-term impact
Yeah,
of the COVID-19 pandemic
of course. That's a big
and
question.
neurodevelopment.
It's a concern for sure.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
We're only beginning to understand the potential consequences of this pandemic.
Yeah, it's too early to say for sure.
And it seems like the ripple effects could be felt for generations to come.
It's possible, yeah.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It is, yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about something a little less ominous.
All right.
I'm fascinated by the connection between folate and schizophrenia.
Oh, yeah, folate.
Dr. Rothman mentioned that women who take folic acid supplements
Mm,
early in pregnancy
right.
have children with a lower risk of autism,
That's right, yeah.
a neurodevelopmental disorder
Yes,
that shares some genetic overlap with schizophrenia.
right. There's some similarities there.
It's an intriguing finding,
It is.
and it suggests that early folate exposure
Yeah.
might play a protective role in brain development.
It might, yeah.
So how does folate work its magic?
Well, folate is essential for cell growth and division,
Okay.
and it plays a crucial role in the development of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Some researchers believe that early folate exposure might help to delay
Okay.
that cortical thinning we
Right.
see in schizophrenia,
Right.
potentially offering a protective effect.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as a vitamin
It is, yeah.
could have such a profound impact on brain development.
It really highlights the importance of prenatal care
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that pregnant women are getting all the nutrients they need
Right.
for a healthy pregnancy.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into the dopamine puzzle.
Okay, the dopamine puzzle.
If all antipsychotic medications work by blocking dopamine,
Mhm.
does that mean schizophrenia is simply a matter of having too much dopamine in the brain?
It's tempting to think so,
Yeah.
but the reality is much more complex.
Okay.
The dopamine hypothesis has been around for decades,
Mm-hmm.
and it's based on some pretty solid evidence.
Okay.
Antipsychotics do target dopamine receptors,
Right.
and drugs like amphetamine and cocaine, which increase dopamine levels,
Right.
can induce psychosis in some people.
So dopamine definitely plays a role,
It does.
but it's not the whole story.
Not the whole story, no.
And one of the biggest clues that something else is going on
Yeah.
is the fact that antipsychotics
Right.
only seem to be effective
Yeah.
at treating the positive symptoms of schizophrenia,
That's right.
like hallucinations and delusions.
Exactly.
They don't do much for the negative symptoms,
Right, like apathy.
like apathy, lack of motivation, social withdrawal,
Mm-hmm.
or for the cognitive impairment
Yeah, the thinking part.
that often accompanies the illness.
Right, it doesn't seem to touch those.
So what's the explanation for that?
Well, it suggests that other neurotransmitter systems are involved, not
Mhm.
just dopamine.
Okay.
And one of the leading contenders is glutamate.
Glutamate. Tell me more about that.
So glutamate is another neurotransmitter in the brain,
Okay.
and it plays a crucial role in learning and memory
Mhm.
and synaptic plasticity.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that drugs like PCP and ketamine,
Okay.
which block glutamate receptors,
Okay.
can cause psychosis.
Wow.
That looks very similar to schizophrenia
Really?
with both positive and negative symptoms.
This is not just about
It's not just about dopamine.
having too much or too little of one neurotransmitter.
No, it's more complicated than that. It's about the balance between different neurotransmitter systems,
Right.
like dopamine and glutamate,
Hmm.
and how they interact with each other.
It's like a delicate ecosystem in the brain.
It is, yeah.
And when one part gets out of whack,
Right.
it throws everything off balance.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining that balance.
To make things even more intriguing,
Oh, there's more.
there's the curious case of smoking.
Ah, yes, smoking.
The high rates of smoking among people with schizophrenia.
Right. That's always been a bit of a mystery.
Is it just a bad habit,
It's more than just a habit.
or is there something more to it?
There's definitely something more to it.
Okay.
Studies have shown that nicotine,
Mm.
the active ingredient in tobacco,
Yeah.
can actually improve certain cognitive functions like
Ari.
attention and working memory.
Wow. That's surprising.
It is, yeah.
So could it be that people with schizophrenia are self-medicating with nicotine
That's one theory.
to try to alleviate some of their cognitive problems?
That's what some researchers believe.
That's incredible to think that something as seemingly harmful as smoking
It is, yeah.
could actually have some potential therapeutic benefits.
It's a complex issue, for sure.
But of course, the risks of smoking far outweigh any potential
Oh,
benefits.
absolutely.
Right.
The risks are just too great,
And it highlights the need to develop safer and more effective treatments
for sure.
for the cognitive symptoms of schizophrenia
Absolutely.
without the harmful effects of nicotine.
Exactly. That's what we're all striving for.
It's amazing how much we've learned about schizophrenia already, and we're just scratching the surface.
I know, right?
It seems like every answer we uncover leads to even more questions.
It's true. That's the nature of science.
We've talked about genes, brain development, neurotransmitters, environmental factors.
Hmm.
It's like trying to solve this giant multi-dimensional puzzle.
It is a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
A very complex puzzle.
And all these pieces are starting to fit together to create this more comprehensive and nuanced picture of schizophrenia.
Exactly. We're getting a much clearer understanding.
And one of the things that struck me is how this new understanding is paving the way for more personalized treatments.
Oh, absolutely.
We're moving beyond that one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
And recognizing that each person's experience of schizophrenia is unique.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of illness.
So, for example, someone with a particular gene variant might benefit from a specific type of medication or nutritional supplement,
Right.
while someone else with a different genetic profile might need a completely different approach.
Exactly. It's about tailoring the treatment to the individual.
It's like personalized medicine for the brain.
That's a great way to put it.
And this is where the power of those large-scale collaborative studies really comes into play.
Absolutely. Those studies are so important.
By pooling data from thousands of individuals with schizophrenia,
Yeah.
researchers can start to identify patterns
Yeah,
and predict which treatments might be most effective for different subgroups of patients.
exactly. It's like using big data to decode the brain
It really is.
and personalize treatments.
What are some of the most promising avenues of research right now?
Well, one area that's really gaining momentum
Okay.
is the study of the immune system's role in schizophrenia.
The immune system.
Yes.
I haven't heard much about that before.
It's a relatively new area of research.
How does that work?
Well, your brain and your immune system are constantly communicating with each other.
Okay.
They're like two sides of the same coin. And when that communication gets disrupted, it can have a ripple effect on brain function.
So if chronic inflammation is playing a role in schizophrenia,
Right.
could targeting the immune system with anti-inflammatory medications or therapies
Potentially.
do a potential treatment strategy?
That's what researchers are trying to find out.
Wow, so that could be a real game changer.
It could be, but it's still early days.
It seems like we've come full circle.
In a way, yes.
We started by questioning whether schizophrenia is a neurodevelopmental or neurodegenerative disorder.
Right.
And now it seems like both processes might be at play,
It's possible.
with the immune system possibly acting as a bridge between the two.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
It really highlights that schizophrenia is this multifaceted illness
It is.
with multiple potential points of intervention.
Yeah, there are many different angles to explore.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey.
I agree.
It's given me so much to think about.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into schizophrenia.
It's been my pleasure.
Until next time, fellow deep divers.
Goodbye.